Thank you for coming this evening. This is our public presentation for school consolidation and redistricting. And what I wanted to note before we get started is all of the materials that I'm going to be talking about today on the PowerPoint will be posted on our website. We have a link on our website that's labeled Consolidation. And so all throughout the process, you as community members, anybody who would wish to get any more information, it will be posted on the Consolidation link on our website. So this PowerPoint will be posted. Any other supporting materials as we go through the process that we feel is important to post, it will be there so that you can have access to it. We are also taping tonight's presentation so that anyone who was unable to make it to this evening's presentation, they can also access that as well. Also, if you would like to go back and re-listen to any parts of the presentation, you would have access to that. The purpose of tonight really is to review all of the timelines that we have in place, talk about how we're going to make the important decisions that we have to make, and then all of the supporting factors that have led us up to this point. In August, the Board of Education approved the study, the consolidation study, and with that directed the administration to move forward and to look in terms of what we could do for consolidation. I'll explain why we're at this point and how we got here, and what we expect to do through the consolidation and redistricting and how it will affect you as a family and affect us as a district. Tonight's goal is purely for public information. No decisions have been made. Tonight we are not going to make any final decisions. It's really a matter of just providing you with the information so that you know where we're going with the process, and then an opportunity for you to know as a public where you can access information and how we expect to be transparent and open with regard to all of our information. The purpose is we really want to make sure that you feel a part of the process as much as possible, that you understand that we're being open and we're considering all options that are out there to consider, and that we're, with the final outline, the final decision point for us would be to consider what's best for our kids and what is going to best serve the district long term. As many of you know, we have been in a financial situation for many, many years, and that's due to declining enrollment. And our enrollment directly impacts our budget. And so when you start looking at our budget, we have to do what we need to do in order to be financially solvent. So with that, I would like to note that the whole process itself, we anticipate it's going to take about 3 to 4 months to make a decision. This is the first piece of the consolidation process itself. So the public information is where we lay out everything. We want you to know everything that we know, and then we'll talk about how we're going to push forward and begin to make decisions. Before I go through the PowerPoint, I would just like to take a moment to introduce Ron Kaufman. He is from RK Educational Planning, and he has been hired by the Board of Education to help guide us and navigate us through the process. He has a great deal of expertise with regard to school planning and also with consolidation and school closure and redistricting. So he's able to make sure that we consider all the unintended consequences and make sure that we're making good decisions long-term for the district. So he'll be doing a portion of the presentation a little bit later this evening. I would also like to acknowledge the leadership team who's they're sitting here in the front. So if you just want to, yeah, there's a lot of people in here, but hello. We do have some board members here as well, so if you just like to raise your hand and people know that you're here. Okay. Unfortunately, since we are taping, I really need to stay up here so that we can go through the PowerPoint. We will have an opportunity at the end to stand for questions, And so if you have any questions specific to the information that we presented this evening, we certainly would entertain those questions. Again, if it's a specific thing about, I know there's a lot of rumors out there. I know people have already come to the conclusion that we've made a decision, and I want to assure everybody here that we have not. There have been no decisions, but I'm certain that people have shared their opinions with not only myself, but members of the board, and with that, people have decided that we've made the decisions. I think there was somebody at the administrative office that said they went to the ACME, and one of the people there said, oh, they know exactly what we're doing, and they laid out the whole plan. So I don't know how the person from ACME knew what we were doing, but I just want you to fully understand and appreciate that we have not made any decisions, and we'll kind of run through some scenarios of what we've considered. That doesn't mean we're not thinking ahead about what could possibly be done to address the funding shortage and school consolidation, but certainly we have made no final decisions. Okay. So to begin, I thought it would be important to talk about where we were when we consolidated in 2010. Of course, I was not here at the time, but and maybe some of you weren't even here in Kent County as well. So I thought it would be important to kind of lay out the foundation of where we were 5 years ago and what happened when the school district went through the consolidation process at that time. At that time, the district was looking at the underutilization of our middle schools. We had 3 middle schools, and because we were experiencing declining enrollment, our middle schools were underutilized. So the 3, as part of the plan that was approved and recommended and approved by the Board of Education at that time, a decision was made to consolidate all 3 middle schools into one school. And then they renamed the school in Chestertown, Kent County Middle School. So we went down from 3 middle schools. One was in Galena, one was in Rock Hall, and one was in Chestertown, and they became one school, which is Kent County Middle School. At that time, they also created a 5th elementary school. Prior to that, and in the early 80s, we only had 4 elementary schools. And so a decision was made to create a 5th elementary school, and that really emerged from utilizing the vacant facility, which had been formerly Galena Middle, became Galena Elementary. And in order to fill all of the elementary schools, a decision was made to move all of the 5th graders who had presently been attending school at the middle school. We moved all of the students that were in the 5th grade, we moved them back to the middle schools, to the elementary schools from the middle school. So that was a change that happened, and a decision was made in order to fill out those schools and create that 5th elementary school. Rock Hall Elementary was also relocated to Rock Hall Middle. There was more space at Rock Hall Middle. So those students were moved to that school, and then the former Rock Hall Elementary became the Board of Ed administrative offices. Prior to that, we had a building in Chestertown, and it was the old Chestertown Board of Ed, which was surplus back to the county, and then the county sold that to Washington College, and many of you have seen all of the construction that's on 213. That was the former Board of Ed. So all of that happened in 2010, and that was a result of declining enrollment. Decisions were made about that, underutilization of some of our buildings, and also to address some of the declining funding sources that we were experiencing at the time. So why are we talking about school consolidation? Here we are 5 years later. Why are we talking about it again? Well, we've got changing county demographics, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that. This is information that has been talked about throughout the community and shared through the Kent County Economic Development Committee. Jim Luft has been the individual that's been sharing a lot of that information throughout the county, and I think it's pretty revealing when you look at the county demographics in terms of how Kent County is changing with regard to the residents that live here in Kent County. That also plays into declining enrollment. We are still continuing with the underutilization of our schools, and of course we have many aging facilities and infrastructure. I think that played into a decision about relocating the Board of Ed, was because that particular building needed a lot of work, and it was going to take a lot of resources to bring that building up to code. We're experiencing a lot of those same issues with a lot of our elementary schools, that a lot of their systems are becoming of an age in which we're going to have to replace the roof, we're going to have to replace the HVAC system, so we have to consider all of those factors as well. And of course, county and state funding constraints, all of those things occur when we lose enrollment, and that informs what the next year budget will be. But then also you have to consider whether the governor will continue to allocate funds for improvement of our school facilities. In our district, we were able to do a number of projects at Garnett, for instance, where the state funded 50% and then local from the county, they funded the other 50%. So there's always a question on whether you're going to have continued state funding to do all of the work that you need to do to your schools. County demographics, I just wanted to briefly let you know where all of the information was taken from. And this is information that I didn't put together, but it's information that was put together, as I stated, by the Kent County Economic Development Committee, and it was directly from a SCORE report that they've been sharing throughout Kent County, various organizations. And I know you can't read this that well, but again, this information is going to be posted online, but I think it's really important to look at a few things. And let me see if I can get up here. Oops. Well, I'm not going to be able to do that, I guess. So, anyways, I will talk about the very top portion of the graph. You'll notice in the 1990s and then forecasting into 2019, the population of Kent County has been pretty much close to 20,000 residents. There's been kind of a plus or minus, but you know, in 1990 we had about 17,800 residents, and forecasting into 2019, we're projecting about 20,000 residents. So I think what's important in this slide is to say that we're pretty much stable with regard to the population of Kent County, but what has changed is the demographics of that population. And you can't really see this, and I have a better graph that I can share with you, but this graph, if you really want to look at it from year to year, it talks about the population by age group. 0 to 14 years old, 15 to 24, 25 to 54, and 55 to 85 plus. And if you look at the demographics, it's really in the, oh, here it is. Okay, now it's working. So if you look here in the middle of this graph, you'll see ages 55 to 85. In 1990, 27.9% of the population was in that age group, and projected for 2019, we're expected to have the population at 40.9%. About 41% of the population in Kent County will be of the age group of 55 to 85. And then if you look at the age group for 25 to 54, it's declining. So it's fair to say that the age group, the childbearing years, or if you will, the families that would be having children at that point in time, that population is decreasing in Kent County. Here's a graph that really shows that a little better, and you can see how the lines are intersecting. The red line is the older age group, ages 55 to 85, and as you can see, it's pretty much on a rapid incline. And then the blue dotted line are the residents between the ages of 25 and 54. It was interesting to me when I looked at this to see this relatively flat line, and that's really the age groups between 15 and 24. and I don't know precisely what that, where that, I'm just speculating on my part, but I would assume that has a lot to do with Washington College and the age group that comes in for the university, and that's pretty much flat because they have a pretty sound enrollment with that particular age group of 18-year-olds to possibly 25-year-olds, depending upon where they're at in their education. The same demographic information in the forecast. You can see this is the information as it's populated out by school age groups. You'll see that in the 1990s, the blue line is ages 0 to 4, so that speculates how many children are not quite in school but are going to soon be of school age. And then the red line is ages 5 to 9. The green line is ages 10 to 14, and the purple is ages 15 to 19. Now, this is not just talking about those school-age children that are in Kent County public schools. These are the school-age children that are in Kent County, so they could be attending other schools. And as you can see, the population is diminishing with the school-age group over the years, and you can see it's still predicted to go down and decline through 2019. This is the last demographic information that I wanted to share, and it's pretty telling as well. If you'll look at the information here, how many are in the labor force? In 2000, 63.6% of the residents living in Kent County were in the labor force. So you wonder, okay, well, where are the rest of them? They're probably retired, so that speaks a lot to that. But as you can see, in 2013, there were less residents in the labor force. What was interesting to me as well is if you look at how many residents are working in the county, of the ones that are in the workforce, 63.6% of that workforce, how many of those residents were working in the county? And you'll see 73.5% were working in the county, and by 2013, only 30% were working in the county. So, there are a lot of things happening within Kent County, and I know that a lot of people want to say, well, people are leaving the county because of the school district. I would argue that the school district is very much a mirror and a reflection of the community, and if the community demographics are changing, we have to adjust accordingly to right-size ourselves in order to reflect what the community is becoming and what it is expected to become. These are the historical trends in the Kent County Public Schools between 1997 and 2015. So it's a little less than 20 years, but about a 20-year snapshot. You'll see that over that period of time, we've decreased enrollment in the elementary enrollment, we've decreased by 30%. Middle school, we've decreased by 35%, and in the high school, 24%. So that's a lot of students that we've lost. Here's another graph that shows it a little more, kind of puts it all in perspective, and you'll see the trend has not changed since 1997, and it still has not changed with this year's enrollment as well. So if you look at the demographics and what's reported to come forth in the coming years, we don't expect that trend to change at all. This is taking this year's enrollment and then projecting out to 2025. Now that's expecting a lot of variables to maintain the same as they are now. And so if there's anything in the community that could change, this could be out the window. So let me tell you how this information is figured out. You take the existing kindergartners and you move them up to first grade, then you move the first graders up to second grade. So you're just bumping them up every year, taking the student population that you have right now. What could change this is if there's ever, say, for instance, a major employer leaves or something that could affect the demographics, then this could be changed overnight. So this is just expecting that everything maintains the same, nothing's going to change, and all of the kids are going to remain as they are, and the families are going to remain in place. So there's a lot of variables that we can't plan on, but moving the kids forward, you can see we don't expect an insurge of students, and it won't be really till about 2022, I think, that you might see a little bit of an increase. But that is pure speculation at this point, and you know, anything can change. There's a lot of questions about, well, okay, the students are leaving because they're all going to private school. And I'm not going to argue the fact that, yes, you know, we are losing some kids to private school. But certainly, they're not of the numbers that demonstrate the 30% decline that we've seen over the last 18 years. And so what I wanted to share with you is just a snapshot of our mobility. In Kent County, we have a high rate of mobility. In other words, we have a lot of families that move out every year, but we always have a lot of families that move in. So what I wanted to show over the last 5 years is to show that we've had a great number of our students that actually exit to another public school, either within Maryland or another state. Now, some people might say, well, that's because they're angry at Kent County and they decided to go to Queen Anne's, or they decided to go to Cecil County. In Maryland, you cannot enroll in another public school unless you can demonstrate you reside in that county. So it's not just a matter of just picking up and deciding, well, I'm going to go to Queen Anne's this year, I'm going to go to Caroline County. You have to be able to provide proof that you are residing in that county. So what this tells me is we have a lot of families moving out, and it's been relatively minimized because we've had a number of kids moving in from other public schools. And we've been able to kind of offset the number of students that are leaving by the number of students that are coming in. So you'll see a large migration of our families moving out of Kent County. Now, we are losing some students to private, and in full disclosure and being transparent, I wanted to provide those numbers for you as well. You'll see that we are losing some students to private school, certainly not at the same rate that we're losing overall enrollment. That certainly does not add up to 30% that we've seen a decline over the years, but we are gaining some of our private school students back as well. And this year we kind of we had an interesting anomaly. We had more students coming back from homeschool than we had exiting. So that was kind of a different dynamic that happened this year. And many of them were at the secondary level. So that's kind of an interesting dynamic for us. And it was very nice to see. Most of them were at the middle school and the high school where they returned to Kent County Public Schools. So this provides you with the overall snapshot of the mobility here in Kent County. So this is really what our enrollment data looks like from 1997 through 2015. You'll see that in 1997 we had 1,449 students enrolled in elementary school, including pre-K. So this year we're down to 1,016 students. We're down 57 students from 2014 to this year. And that's about a 450, more than 400 students that we've lost since 1997 through 2015. You know, that's arguably 1 or 2 schools based on the size of our schools right now. Secondary enrollment, in 1997 we had 1,438 students. Today, on September 30th, that is the date that we have to report our enrollment to the state, and that determines our funding for the subsequent year, we were down to 1,014 students, down 24 students. So the greatest drop was in the elementary level than the secondary level. But as you can see, we dropped another 400 students there as well. So again, another 1 or 2 schools, depending upon how you want to look at it. This information I thought was important to share with you as well. It talks about the school-rated capacity and utilizations of our schools. The first, under the SRC, that's state-rated capacity, that shows you what capacity our schools could hold or were built to hold. So Galena was built to hold 317 students. At present, we have 171. Garnett was built to house 323 students. At present, we have 256. So what I will tell you is we're in the process of updating these capacity and utilization numbers. I wanted to share with you what is already on file with the Maryland State Department of Education, MSDE. These are the numbers that are on file there, but these numbers have not been updated for 10 to 15 years. And so at present, we're evaluating that. Mr. Kaufman is helping us, and we're going to be submitting the new numbers to MSDE so that we can revise these to accurately reflect where we are right now. And I will tell you, these numbers will be very different. Right now, it's showing that Galena is at 60% capacity. They're more like 50% capacity. So I think this is very important information, because if we look at closing a school, we need to know whether we have room at the other schools to house the remainder of the students. Millington was built to hold 249 students. At present, there are 161 students. Rock Hall, 272. 167 is their present enrollment, and then Wharton was built to house 302. Presently, they're at 261. Same thing with the middle school and high school. These are the capacity and utilization numbers. The middle school, which initially years ago was Chestertown Middle, but now it's Kent County Middle. It was built to house 678 students. Presently, there are 447 students at the middle school. High school was built for almost 1,200 students. Right now, they're at 567. So again, these numbers do not, the capacity and utilization numbers are what's presently filed with MSDE. These are not our current numbers, which will show that we have a lot more rooms available and they're not filled to capacity. And it also projects out to 2024 using our enrollment figures. So what's our budget forecast? On September the 30th, 2015, we submitted our final enrollment to MSDE. Although we do count all of our pre-K students, we are not funded for pre-K. It's kind of interesting to me in Maryland, where we're mandated to provide pre-K for those students that qualify for pre-K. Of course, in Kent County, we open up pre-K to any student who's 4 years old. So we have a universal pre-K. We accept all students. But in Maryland, you're only mandated to provide pre-K to students that qualify for pre-K. But yet we're not funded for them. So what we have to do is we have to take the enrollment and we have to back out the pre-K students. So once you do that, we're down 62 students. If you use the estimate of about $13,000, you can see that we're forecasting going into FY17, 2016-17 school year, we're projecting that we're going to be at a deficit of $806,000. So I thought it would also be important for you to know just where do we allocate all of our resources in our budget. We have about a $26 million budget, Kent County Public Schools, and 77% of our budget is allocated to salaries for everyone in the county. And then the remaining 26% is divided in a variety of ways, much of which we don't have control over. For instance, we don't have control over the utilities. We have to put aside money for fixed costs, and we're really at the mercy of whatever those fixed costs will be in any given year. So about 4% is allocated for those the utilities. We have about 1% that's allocated for supplies and materials in the classroom in the schools, about 1% for textbooks, and then we have about 2% that's for other, like our property insurance, communications, rental equipment. If we have to rent something to repair something at any of our schools, we do have money set aside for that, and we do set money aside for professional development or in-service. And then, of course, we have a big chunk here. It's about 15%, and that is for our transportation. We contract out for contractors to provide transportation to and from school, and so that's a good portion of that piece of the pie. We also contract out with county health to provide the nursing personnel. We also have an Aramark contract and Xerox, and that's the alternative school at the high school, so that's about 15%. And I'll talk a little bit more about that because I think you might be interested to see what we've done in the recent years to try to reduce some of these costs. The general breakdown of wages, again, 77% is allocated to salaries, but of that 77%, 47% is allocated to our teachers, our IAs, and our substitutes. 5% is allocated to school administration, and then 14% is school-based support staff. That would be custodians, secretaries, guidance counselors, cafeteria, anybody who's there to support. They're not actual classroom teachers, but they're there to support the school. Those would be under the school-based support staff. And then we have 5% of the board administration, and then 3% of the support staff that assists the board administration. And of course 26% for fixed charges. So the point of all this is to show that the majority of our budget is tied up in salaries. So that is where we're going to be able to yield a return fairly quickly in terms of trying to cut costs. What have we done in the last 4 years? What I thought would be important is to show you that we have taken steps as a school district to try to reduce costs. And so this is a 4-year snapshot in terms of what we've reduced and under what category. So these are wage reductions, and you'll see it's based by category. And these wage reductions have been taken by elimination of positions and or downgrading of positions to say from an assistant superintendent to a supervisor or something of that nature. So all of this reflects all of the reductions by category. So you can see all of the reductions that we've taken as a school system. And I might add that some of this would have reflected a much lower ranking in terms of reduction. But in the last 2 years, we've also been able to provide raises for all categories of our employees. So that kind of added to when we were taking away. So you can see that administration has been reduced by almost 7.5%. The teacher IA subcategory, a little over 7%. Instructional support, about 7.8%. Special education, 3.4%. Student transportation, 18%. Operation of plant is our custodians, so there's been a reduction of 7.2%. Maintenance of plant, 2.14%. That's an increase because we have not reduced the number of people that work in the maintenance, but that reflects the raises that we've afforded the employees over the last couple of years. The majority, there are some positions that are associated with the Aramark contract, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And then we've reduced cafeteria workers by 3%, at least the wages. And that means that's not that we reduce wages, but we reduce positions. Oops, let me see, I think I went the wrong way. Oops, excuse me. Okay, so 4-year contract reductions. These are a lot of the things that we've done just in the last 2 to 3 years. We've reduced our Xerox contract by 27%, and a lot of that was reduced just by making some simple changes of taking out the color copiers that we didn't think we needed in all of our departments in our schools and replace them with black and white copiers. We saw a great deal of savings. It was about almost $80,000 that we saved by doing that. We reduced our Aramark contract by 40%, bus contracts by 17.11%, and much of that is by taking some of our buses out of the fleet. In other words, deciding that we needed less buses to transport our kids, and there was some savings there. For every bus that we take out of commission, so to speak, we save about $40,000 to $50,000. So there's quite a bit of savings that we can realize by trying to be more efficient in the way we transport our kids. And then the alternative program, even though we contract that out, we have a savings about 27% from when the school district operated that program on our own. So what are some options on how we could save money? We could close the school and surplus the building. That would be a savings about $500,000, $555,000. And that saving really comes from staffing and also from saving the building costs. If we don't have the building, we don't have to heat and cool it, we don't have to maintain the property in any way. And then there's some obvious things, that duplication that you wouldn't have to have at one building, that if you consolidate, you could save staffing in that way. So we were being fairly conservative. We think there might be some more savings there, but we didn't want to overestimate and then feel like we were not being transparent about that. So we felt pretty comfortable that that's about the savings we could have with closing one school. And if you'll recall, the shortfall going into next year is $806,000. So that's what we would save by closing one school. So we'd still have to find additional dollars somewhere else. If we were to close two schools and surplus both buildings, then there would be a savings a little over $1 million. Again, using that same concept in terms of the building and the staffing. What are the advantages for consolidating our our elementary schools? We could stabilize teacher assignments. As our schools become smaller, we're having to move our teachers to accommodate where the enrollment is. So for instance, if you have a large second grade and a small first grade, you may have to have two teachers. In a smaller school, you may have to have two teachers assigned to first grade, but then they're going to be moving up to second grade the following year. So you have to move a teacher to accommodate that. So we are moving teachers around quite a bit to accommodate the spikes in our class sizes. So if we were to consolidate our schools, we would have a more robust way of assigning our teachers, and hopefully be able to stabilize the fact that we have to transfer teachers or move them from grade level to grade level. We would have curriculum grade level experts. Our teachers would be able to learn the curriculum and know that they were going to be a first grade teacher or second grade teacher for more than just 1 year. We could reduce our teacher training costs for retraining our teachers as they move to a different grade level. More opportunities for our teachers to collaborate. Right now, in some of our schools, we only have one first grade teacher, one second grade teacher, one third grade teacher. So it's really hard for our teachers to collaborate, talk to one another about the new curriculum. And if we had more than one first grade teacher, they'd have someone to talk to and collaborate with. Classroom assignment options would be, sometimes we have students that need to be separated, or maybe a student would have a better opportunity working with X teacher versus Y teacher. You have some options on where you can assign the students. And then also separating students that maybe need to be separated from one another. Other considerations, if we were to close elementary school, one or two elementary schools, we could move the fifth graders back to the middle school. I know that's kind of like, well, you did that once, but if we move the fifth graders back to the middle school, then we could build some more capacity, so there'd be some growth at the remaining elementary schools. And then an idea has been floating around by about moving the eighth graders to the high school and creating an eighth grade academy. upstairs. There's an upstairs here at the high school, and it's a good way in which we could separate the population but create an 8th grade academy. So what would be the advantages for doing that? We could strengthen our fine arts programs. Here at the high school, a lot of the fine arts programs are not filled to capacity, and so if we had our 8th graders here at the high school, while they can't participate in athletics, they certainly could participate in the band, choir, and drama. So it'd be an opportunity for us to build up some of our fine arts programs. Same with the 5th grade. If our 5th grade was at the middle school, they would have an opportunity to have dedicated fine arts period in terms of trying to fit them in at the elementary. And it's sometimes really hard for us to accommodate the band program at the elementary. This would have an opportunity to fill out those programs. We would have improved facilities for science and athletics. Many of our students and some of you parents here that may know that your child has been tested in 5th grade for science. We have to have laboratory facilities in order to teach the next gen science standards. And not all of our schools, elementary schools, have science labs. So if we put our 5th graders back at the middle school, we would have availability of those science labs. And there would be improved facilities for athletics. Content specialists. Our 5th graders would have the benefit of having content specialists for all subject areas. And then, of course, for the 8th grade, we'd have early high school integration into getting acclimated. We have already considered and really would like to move forward with relocation of the board office, the Board of Ed administrative offices, and surplus the building in Rock Hall. Presently, we're utilizing that building at 50%. In my opinion, it's a very ineffective use of a building. You know, there are more empty offices than there are people that occupy those offices. So if we were to surplus that building, there would be savings in the building costs as well. Additional suggestions that have come up, and I want to be transparent about, at least we're thinking about that. There was an idea that was floated out there about moving the middle school students to the high school. And while I think that's worthy of consideration, I think we have to be thinking about what does that mean, and does that really make sense? If we were to move the middle school kids to the high school, is there a way to separate middle school students from high school students? When this high school was built, it was built for 1,200 students. Is there room? Absolutely. You could definitely move those kids here. But the question is, do you really want 6th graders, you know, integrating with 12th graders? And is that something that this community could support? I don't have an answer for that. That's something that we have to talk about. But is there a way to separate the middle school students from the high school students? Is there a way to separate, have separate lunch periods? Now, we talked about moving the 8th graders because we could segregate them and put them in the upstairs facility and keep them pretty much separate from the high school. I'm fairly certain we do not have the facilities to totally separate 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, but we certainly will look into that. And then the question is, can you rotate an additional 450 students into the science labs and then use of the gym? Right now, the gym is being pretty well utilized full-time, so we'd have to have another 450 students that we would have to you know, schedule into the use of the gym, and I'm not really sure that we have the facilities to do that. Okay, so with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Kaufman.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me okay?
No.
Okay. My name is Ron Kaufman, and I represent RK Educational Planning. And we provide strategic and site-specific planning services to school systems. And this is considered this is a project like any project that you would consider. When I say project, I'm talking about new schools, replacement schools, modernizations, things where you have to start almost from scratch and bring people together, develop consensus, and provide recommendations for how you're going to build. Long-term planning would be strategic planning, it would be master plan, capital budget planning, and the student enrollment, which is all part of it. So that's what we do. I hope everybody has a little extra energy. We're almost done. We had all the facts and figures from Dr. Couch, which kind of painted a little bleak picture of what's happening, but it happens all over the country in different parts. And demographics is a human behavior that changes, and it's very hard to predict. Planners try to predict it, but it's difficult. And the school system, like Dr. Couch said, has to mirror or reflect what's happening in the community. And this is what we're going to accomplish with this process. Hopefully we have a better understanding tonight that why we're here and why we're talking about school consolidation and redistricting. Now, a little bit about my background. I've been in planning, design, and construction for K through 12 facilities for the last 20 years. I focused my last 10 years on facility management and planning. I worked for several school systems within Maryland, Cecil, and Harford County. Different dynamics there, obviously. A lot of growth in those areas, or a lot of stability. There is, Cecil is a 16,000 student school system. Hartford is 38,000. There's still the same emotions that are involved when you talk about redistricting, even when you're adding a school rather than taking it away, because there's generations of families that went to a school, and a school is basically a symbol of the community. So when you're talking about shifting students to another school, it's always difficult to have people accept that. It's necessary, but it's still difficult to ask somebody to do that. RK Educational Planning was hired by the Board of Education of Kent County to provide GIS technology services to create the existing attendance zone area maps that we have now in place. And with those files, GIS, Global Information Systems, GPS, basically, where you're able to take those files and manipulate them. With the student data attached to those files, you can actually move and see the results immediately when you do different scenarios. So we're providing those services to the county, as well as the customized planning process that we're implementing, which I'll be showing you what that is in a few minutes, to bring people together, the public, the community, the school system, and try to work out some understanding of what the parameters are, considerations, things that are important to communities, and we'll take all that in an organized fashion, and we will submit that to the stakeholder committee members who were appointed by Dr. Couch, and that'll be in the information that you'll see on the website. I won't go into those details, but they will be responsible for actually taking the information, analyzing it, manipulating it, and coming up with different scenarios and presenting them and working them back and forth with the community and with the Board of Education to come up with a final recommendation, which is going to be presented in January. RK specializes in the planning process, and really that's what we're doing here tonight, is doing a planning process. We're including everybody in an organized fashion, and it's going to be clearly laid out for you in the slides preceding that I'll be showing you. It's my experience with planning processes, if they're done correctly, they're beneficial. If they take in as much different representation of different groups of the community and filter that information in an organized fashion, and it's used or not used. And we will have a dialogue with people. You could submit questions through the website. There's a link that takes you into a mailbox that we'll be looking at every day and filtering those questions. A lot of the questions in something like this are going to be redundant. It's no fault of anybody's, but people immediately think of obvious things to ask. So what we do is we refer those people to the frequently asked questions section of our website, and those questions are answered. They're just not answered directly to you. Now, if something is unique to your community or something that we have to take a little bit more time to analyze, then what we'll do is we'll put that aside and look at that more carefully. By bringing people together, like I said, we have specific categories of considerations, criteria, and parameters that we use for the school selection of what school would actually be closed. We look at how we would shape the new boundaries based on various categories of things that need to be considered when you shift students from one attendance area to another. Before I get into the slide presentation, I just want to go over a couple of understandings tonight. My company was retained by the Board of Education to provide consulting services, to advise, to organize, and coordinate the process of this entire stakeholder committee. And what I don't want people to think is that we were hired to make decisions on behalf of the Board of Education. That's not what we're here for. We're here to organize the process where people come together, collaborate, come to consensus, compromise, and then those things shape scenarios, and they're vetted, discussed, and at the end of the day, we present the final recommendations to the Board of Education for approval. That's the way it is. And so I don't come in here with any predetermined ideas of how it should be done, or anybody in the school system is not doing that. It's all based on a process that we go through. The next item that I want to mention before I get into the slides is that after seeing the facts and figures that Dr. Couch presented tonight, it's quite obvious that there is very few solutions to the budget problems of Kent County Public Schools. And what I don't want people to think is that this process could determine that we don't need to do anything and we can just forget about this and go on our merry way. But that's not really the realistic thing to think about, because at the end of the day, the facts and figures, even if they stayed the way they are today, means that we would need to close at least one school. And with the evaluation that's going to occur, we might even determine that even another school would need to be closed, not only for currently, but for the future. Because you don't want to do a process like this every year. A process like this should only be done maybe the minimum 5 years. And even that, it shouldn't be that much once you make decisions like this. Because we have enough information, demographic and student enrollment and births, to be able to project at least 10 years out. Now, as you get beyond 5 years, those projections are not as tight as year to year, but still, they're pretty close. And where we're at now with the capacities, we're so underutilized with the facilities that it doesn't make sense to think any differently. So I just want to make that clear before I go further. And lastly, the focus groups, which I'll mention, is a process that we're going to do next week. It's Tuesday at 7 to 9. And I'll explain that a little bit more in my presentation. But that is where it's a constructive process where people come and volunteer a couple of hours to go through some of these considerations and parameters and criteria that we were going to use to shape our new boundaries and determine what schools should be considered or not considered. So that's what that focus group is, and it's an important part of the process. And I think there's a few more seats left.
I'll talk about that.
Yeah, Dr. Couch will talk a little bit about that at the end. Okay, and let me go right into the presentation. This is our, I'm going to start with the first two slides, which is the consolidation and redistricting timeline. We started with, on October 1st, we got student data information. Geocode is a terminology where we're taking student data and we're plotting it on the actual maps of the county. Electronically, we can actually know where the students actually live, and when we move those students into different areas, we know exactly what that number is. So that's what geocoding means. The public information session, that's tonight. Tomorrow, or I guess by early next week, we'll have a lot of this information on the website for everybody to really spend a little bit more time looking at, because there's a lot of information to see. The focus group is on the 20th of October, and that's going to be here in the cafeteria. And we'll explain more about that for those who are participating in that process. November 2nd is the first stakeholder committee meeting. That's where we take all the information that we gathered and start creating different scenarios with the technology, the GSI software. So that's what we do there. We're going to go to the Board of Education for an update on the 9th, just to let them know where we're at in the process. It's going to be very brief, just to keep them informed. On the 17th is our second stakeholder meeting. As we get more information and discover more things, we're going to reshape those boundaries to reflect that. December 7th is our last stakeholder committee meeting, and hopefully by then we'll know exactly what schools and what the boundaries are going to look like. January 11th is the final, the second Board of Education business update meeting, and that's just to let them know where we're at, and at that point we're expecting more of a dialogue from the Board of Education based on their feedback from the community. So that'll influence a little bit of our scenarios to date for there. January 25th is when we go to the Board of Education for the final approval of those consolidation and redistricting. And the February to April Board of Education hearings, that's only if necessary, if there's any kind of serious hearings that have to occur because of this redistricting or consolidation. We'll allot those months for that. And May to August, we'll try to implement what we established here and what was approved. This is basically the same thing, just giving you the dates on a chart. Committee groups and purposes. So when I say stakeholder committee, I'm talking about people that participate in stakeholder committee is staff, principal, administrators, community members, school board, elected officials, anybody in the community representing with different interests. That would be somebody that would be appointed to the stakeholder committee. The responsibility of that would be to review public input, consider the Board of Education policies, work with the GIS consultant, which is the technology piece of reshaping the boundaries, and developing those new scenarios. The stakeholder committee appointed by the superintendent of schools, those names are already listed. You'll see them on the website on the stakeholder management proposal, which is a detailed proposal that goes through the background and all the processes that you see up here. Focus group, the representatives for each school attendance area, and there's an administrator and a facilitator and a note taker. And it's basically broken up into regions of the county, or in this case, school attendance area of the elementary schools, where we bring people in groups and we talk about the different considerations and parameters that we're going to use to develop the scenarios for the redistricting and school consolidation. They're going to provide suggestions, ideas, they're going to discuss things, they're going to express what's important to them, and we're going to take all that in. We're going to look at that and see what can apply throughout the county, because obviously there's going to be personal interests that are going to be discussed, but really we're looking for things that make a difference to the entire implementation of the plan. So we'll be filtering those things, and but again, all the input we want, because there's a lot of ideas that we get from random input or random speaking of different members of the community. So we like that input, we want it, and we organize it in a way that we either use it or we don't, and if we don't use it, we explain why we don't use it. A lot of times there's a lot of legislation or constraints that don't allow us to do a lot of the things that the community might want us to do for things. And the Board of Education obviously will be the final approver of whatever we recommend. This is just a logical flow diagram of what I just mentioned here. It starts with tonight, focus group, first stakeholder meeting, second, third, Board of Education, and then your updates. It's really pretty simple, and it's not meant to be drawn out any longer than it's supposed to be. When I mention criteria, considerations, and parameters, this is a criteria for school identification of the school that we would select for a closing. You know, these are some of the things that we would think about before we would close a school, obviously. You know, the current capacity of the school, which is the state-rated capacity, the space availability and utilization, that's how many students enrollment is there, divided by the capacity, gives you the utilization percentage. And when that goes under 60%, that's a concern, because that means your building is underutilized, which in a lot of these cases you have 60 or less percentages. The ancillary space availability, that's your core spaces of your building. When we think about core spaces, auditorium, cafeteria, common areas of the building, we look at that to see if we decide to redistrict one school area into another, we want to make sure, number one, that there's enough seats to do that. Number two, we want to make sure that the common space can also handle it. A lot of times when you shift students into another school, you might have the seats, you might not have the common area space to go along with it. And if you're undersized with cafeteria, that could be a big problem. So those things have to be looked at. The aging infrastructure, as was already mentioned, is important, because you don't want to keep necessarily a school that is going to require a major modernization or replacement, which is going to be worth about $32 million, maybe, or even systemically replacing HVAC or some major components of the building can cost maybe $15 to $20 million. You might not want to do that if you can shift something somewhere else and save that investment. And also, the state doesn't want to spend money on buildings that are underutilized and not showing any sign of growth either. So that's consideration. Program requirements, that's for special programs that you might have in certain schools. If you shift that, if you take that school offline, then those programs have to be relocated to a different school. And is that feasible? I don't know. That's something that has to be looked at. The September 30th enrollment, which Dr. Couch mentioned, That was already looked at and submitted. 7-year enrollment projections. 7-year is the state threshold of how they fund capital improvements. So when you go to the state for funding, they look at your enrollment 7 years out, and they want to know that, okay, you're asking for more capacity, but reality is that you have schools around you that you can do a redistricting, and those students can go into those other schools. So we're not going to approve that funding for that. So you're going to have to come up with a different plan, or you're going to have to justify why you can't redistrict to those other schools. So that's what the 7-year enrollment is. It's a trigger for the state to see whether funding is, and they always look at that, no matter whether you're asking for more capacity or not, because they don't want to fund schools that are declining, because it's not a good investment for them, and certainly not for the community itself. Implementation of prior initiatives, that's really where Dr. Couch was explaining some prior initiatives that occurred. So you just have to take a look at that. Residential subdivision growth, could be a factor. I don't know if it would apply in many areas of this county, but certainly you want to look at, is there any developments that are on the books or being projected in any particular attendance area? You want to make sure that you have enough seats for that projected development and where those students would go. Review of the capital improvement projects. Basically, that's a priority list of all the replacements systemically for components of the building that are aging, and that would need to be also looked at when you consider what school is to be removed from the system. Unique community requirements, that could be anything. That's just based on the community. Maybe the community uses that building for senior citizen activities. And then if you take that building away, then those people wouldn't have any place to go. That's a consideration that would have to be discussed. And geographic. So let's go right into the attendance zone parameters. So when you look at redistricting, you're talking about reshaping your current attendance area zones, and that's like drawing lines on a map that actually could run down the center of the street or could run right through a property. When we do our boundary adjustments, we do them based on property, and what that does is it just makes sure that properties are defined from one attendance area to another, rather than having lines go through properties, which wouldn't make a lot of sense and cause a lot of confusion. There's safety and security would be a consideration when we look at a school, school zones. How are we moving, where are we moving the students? We're transporting them. Are they walking? What are they doing? Is there a security issue? We would look at that. We would definitely take that in consideration. Site configuration of the schools and where they reside in the community. That's another consideration that we would use. The structural system of the buildings. Community neighborhoods is a consideration. Nobody likes their community or their development to be cut by a boundary line where one attendance area goes to one school and one goes to another. Nobody likes that. So we try to circumvent that if we can and prevent those kind of things. Transportation, that's a big thing. What's going to happen when we take a school out and those kids have to be bused to another school? How long will they be on the bus? You know, what's acceptable amount of time to be on the bus? You know, is that going to create undue hardship for parents who drop their children off to school? So there are things that we have to talk about and consider when we're making those kind of decisions. Community connections, I kind of mentioned a little bit of that, you know, maybe a senior citizen program, after-school program, special education program sponsored by the county, used in a facility. You know, where would those students go? How would they get there? What kind of transportation how much would those things cost is another factor. You know, that's all part of the consideration. Educational program delivery methods, that's also would be considered how education is delivered in those schools. Is there one school that provides a better educational adequacy than another? That's something we would look at. The grade level configuration categories, that's what Dr. Couch was mentioning, where we could actually free up more capacity in your elementary schools even after we close a school or even two by moving 5th graders in middle, 8th graders in high school. There's plenty of capacity in the middle and high school to do that. How does the community feel about that? How do the educators feel about that? That's something we'll talk about. Boundary exceptions, that is something that always has to be looked at, because you have attendance areas, but then you have a lot of boundary exceptions for whatever reason that the Board of Education might grant boundary exceptions for a number of different reasons. How many boundary exceptions are in a particular school attendance area? How does that affect them, and why are they being granted that permission to do so? They're things that we would have to look at as well. Grandfathering is just something that we use in this redistricting process, and that is where you have siblings that go to the same school. So if we make a decision to redistrict a school, then one sibling would go to one school, but one would stay. Typically what we would do, or the Board of Education would grant permission for families that have more than one student in a school to stay at that school, especially if they're close to graduating. That would be grandfathering. That's an example of grandfathering. Grandfathering could apply to other scenarios that part of the process.